What a beautiful face I have found in this place that is circling all around the sun. What a beautiful dream that could flash on the screen in a blink of an eye and be gone from me. Soft and sweet, let me hold it close and keep it here with me. And one day we will die and our ashes will fly from the aeroplane over the sea. But for now we are young, let us lay in the sun and count every beautiful thing we can see. Love to be in the arms of all I'm keeping here with me. What a curious life we have found here tonight. There is music that sounds from the street. There are lights in the clouds and there's ghosts all around. Hear a voice as it's rolling and ringing through me. Soft and sweet, how the notes all bend and reach above the tree. Now how I remember you, how I would push my fingers through your mouth to make those muscles move. You made your voice so smooth and sweet, but now we keep where we don't know. All secrets sleep in winter clothes with one you loved so long ago. Now we don't even know his name. What a beautiful face I have found in this place that is circling all around the sun. And when we meet on a cloud, I'll be laughing out loud. I'll be laughing with everyone I see. Can't believe how strange it is to be anything at all.
All right. Welcome, guys. It is Tuesday, so time for another Note to File Live. Dr. Fox, what's up, man?
Hey, Brad, how's it going, man? Happy December.
It's Tuesday. Oh, yeah, it is, man. It's almost the end of the year already, isn't it?
I know, a little bit of a pivot, right? We're supposed to have a good conversation today. Hopefully, our guest is going to feel better. We'll get there. To anyone who's listening, we'll get there.
Yeah, guys, sorry, last minute cancellation. No worries. We'll get rescheduled, but, probably plenty to talk about in the meantime.
Oh my gosh. It's end of the year, man.
Right. So if you're listening, as always, we appreciate your comments, questions. Feel free. It's kind of anything goes, pretty loose. These are loose conversations. So love to hear from you guys. I've got a couple of folks from Clario in the building today who are, just sort of going around, I think, and visiting, or at least visiting our site and kind of getting a feel for the user experience at sites, which is something that's really cool. I think we're seeing more of it. I don't know if you've been hearing much of that, Fox, but
that's the number one request. Hey, do you know any sites that are willing to talk to us? Let us come visit. Let us shadow them. We want to build products for them. A huge request. So any sites want to get on a list to open up their sites and their operations to people who want to make things better, there's a big demand for it.
I mean, I think it's just a smart move all in all, right? I mean, it's I still feel like ultimately the companies that are going to come out ahead are going to be those that have the best product. And a lot of that's going to come from the site experience, site feedback. I'm being asked more and more from sponsors, and do you have vendors that you like or vendors that you have in mind? I've had sponsors call me to like vet vendors, which I thought was kind of cool, right? They're like, hey, I know you know this group, or you've worked with this group before. What do you think? Tell me about them. What's good? What's bad? What's ugly? I think that'll really continue to expand probably as time goes on. Because again, I think that's who's going to be able to win up the most market cap, right? The stuff people want to use.
So what does Clario do?
All the things now. They went through, I still can't tell you, because there's sort of growth by acquisition company, and then there's been some divestment as well. So if you ever use ERT, I know that Clario now, or maybe not now, I guess it's been a while now, but they own ERT, BioClinica. They have an EDC, which I didn't even realize until recently. So, ePro devices, some cardiac safety like EKGs, essential EKGs, BioClinica now. So like centralized, like central image uploading for, image adjudication. So they kind of got their hands on a bunch of stuff. But again, I thought it was cool for them to come out, spend some time. They're talking to my coordinators who, use their stuff even more than I could possibly use it. And just being able to take that, take it back and take it under consideration is pretty awesome.
So Brad, it's the end of the year. One of my ideas was we're going to be hitting the holidays pretty quick. So this may be like one of the last note to files before holidays really start hitting. What do you think of a year recap? Like what has happened this year that, at least in the industry, at Hightower, whatever it might be, what do you think has happened that the big highlights?
So I would love to set aside some time to do like an industry recap sort of, because think about what's happened this year, man. Did CVS stopped doing trials, right? They backed out of the clinical trial game. I thought that was a pretty big deal in the industry. We had, the whole care access debacle. I'm trying to think of I'm trying to think of things that weren't so salacious, like what are some of the positive things,
well, don't forget the DCT draft that came out.
DCT draft guidance. That's a big one, which I still think there's going to be a lot of interesting things that spin off of that. That'll be honestly, again, as much as I'm, devil's advocate more often than I should be, I'm kind of excited about the possibilities that could bring. Especially if there is a little bit of clarity in the final guidance. I'm not confident that there will be, but I think if there is, and the local HCP angle becomes something that sites can really manage, which, this is something new for me, but I recently brought somebody on board to go do physician outreach and help really develop those referral relationships. It's something we've seen work when we've put energy into it. But then if things flip into like, hey, you can also do clinical trial activities at local HCP, again, mixed feelings about it, doesn't really matter. But if you have those relationships and they're strong, it's that much easier to actually turn those into places where clinical trial activity can take place, right? Because ultimately it sounds great, but it's going to be a lift for sites.
Oh yeah, it's a culture change. You're looking at a turning of a lot of tables. This goes back into healthcare integration, and it goes back into a lot of the other things that we're looking at. You've got a combination of the FDA guidance coming in, so the FDA is saying, okay, this is okay to do. We want to put the plans around it. But don't forget, you've also got government granting agencies coming in saying, we're going to give money. We're going to give grant money to people who can build companies to integrate DCT utilities into healthcare. So you've got two different sides coming in, and then you've got sites saying, well, what are we going to do now?
Well, look, you can educate me because I don't know. I'm all over the place sometimes, but like telehealth is already a thing, right?
Oh yeah.
So what else do we need? We've got all the other tools. There's there's ePros, and there's a lot of other things we can do. Telehealth already exists. What's missing? Like, what are the missing pieces, I guess, to sort of really fully integrate more closely?
Yeah, so when you're sitting on all of the committees who are writing response letters to the FDA, a lot of the things came through. PI oversight was a big thing. This introduction of the task log, that was a big thing. The transport of IP was also a big thing. There's a lot of logistics specific to research that a lot of the sites are very nervous about. And the interesting thing is they're all asking for clarity. What should we do for this? But the FDA's answer is always, you are all individual sites. You have different stories and different needs. You guys figure it out.
Yeah.
So then you've got this big twist between the sites looking for the grocery list. What should we be doing for this? And then the industry saying, that's up to you. Figure it out. So the sites that figure it out are going to be the ones.
Yeah, I still wonder, and you and I wouldn't say we have different opinions. I think you have a stronger opinion than I do. In so much as sites saying, like, we're doing this and we're allowed to do it, so we're going to do it, versus sort of like, again, believe it or not, like I kind of try to like play nice in the sandbox with the sponsors, because one of my colleagues here is laughing at me as I'm saying this out loud. But ultimately at the end of the day, like, we have to answer to we don't have to answer to, we have to work with and collaborate with the sponsor. So I don't know, where do we draw the line? How do we
missing component? That missing component right there is actually in the FDA guidance. So there's a component in the FDA guidance, the draft guidance, that should be published this month. And it says DCT utility compatible visits will be published in the IRB approved protocol. Think about that. When you bake the permission to perform DCT in an IRB approved protocol that is sent out to the sites, there is the sponsor permission, so to speak, that sites need to play nice. Sponsors are saying, we wrote this protocol, the IRB approved it. On these different visits, you can perform DCT.
I see what you're saying. Yeah. So, I'm sorry, I got distracted. I think Nelson Ruttrick might join us. So ignore me for a moment. I'm going to get the link sent over to him. Have you known Nelson?
Yeah.
Have you talked to Nelson before?
Oh yeah, I met him at SCRS last year.
Oh,
Nelson's
nice. Okay.
A great guy. He was really cool. And as Brad brings him on for Note to File Live, this is an open forum. If you have an opinion, if you want to come on, talk about it, what were your highlights over the year? Give us a message. We can get you on here and we can talk about this for the open forum.
Yeah, and next time, and maybe we will set one aside that's specifically for that. I would like that. But yeah, guys, if you want to come on and talk, feel free. This is your time. Today kind of fell apart a little bit, which is fine. Also, we do plenty of episodes which are just kind of open talking. There's so much that goes on from week to week in this industry. There's no shortage of things to talk about.
Well, and honestly, I think that you're going to see a lot more SOS webinars coming up. A lot in the next 2 months. So you'd probably be tired. Nelson, how's it going, man?
Great. How you doing?
Doing all right. Dressed to impress as usual.
Today was the day for me. I was like, I got the suit on. Time to join. So I met Dr. Fox in person, Brad.
That's what he had said. Yeah.
So you're the only one left now.
Well, I'm a hard man to find. I like to blend into a crowd. So you have to.
Well, now that you like
where's Waldo?
Sorry. Now that you like conferences more, maybe it can happen.
It's true. Also, I'll be at Scope, I think, in February.
Okay. Me too.
Okay, so I'll be around a little bit. They're starting to grow on me, actually, kind of going out and meeting people. I'm a terrible introvert, so I don't always do great in crowds, but I do have fun when I actually force myself out there.
Yeah, I go to like 30 conferences a year. I devour conferences, right? So I'm a big believer in them.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I'm
So
happy to have converts.
Do you find that you like have direct, like, do you directly win business from attending conferences, or is it more, the general networking, you think?
I directly win business from conferences, but my site is very niche, right? Therapeutically. So the only place to win business is therapeutic area specific conferences.
Right.
Those conferences, actually, drug companies are going to find sites. The conferences that are not therapeutic area specific, they're to meet other sites or vendors, but there's nothing to be gotten study wise.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that's interesting, and maybe something like more focused I need to consider is and maybe we'll talk offline, or maybe if I know your niche, like you said, you've got sort of like your lane that you stay in, but I imagine there's hundreds of like therapeutic area specific conferences.
Oh, there's so many, and there's more the more like trendy a therapeutic area is. So there's like a lot of NASH and MASH.
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of NASH come through right now.
And like funny. Obesity conferences right now, there's loads of them. So those are the sorts of things that if you're into that area, there's a lot popping up. And the only people who go to those conferences are people who want to meet somebody and have something to offer and something they want. So
fair.
So Nelson, question. Everyone said 2023 was going to be the year of the site, right? That's what we said this time last year. Edie Edens and a lot of the other groups, they said 2023, the year of the site. What was 23 the year of for Nelson and for Nelson's site? And what do you see as the industry? Like, where do you see it going, or what do you see happen?
Yeah, my site grew a lot in 2023. So I think that what has happened across the board, and I helped inspire it a little. It's tough to know how much anything's changed in the industry from like our best gut instinct, right? And there's not many sources to rely upon to figure that out. The thing I've used most has been the Sunshine Act disclosures that happen every June 30th. So I don't really know of other sources to use. There's like a annual newsletter IQVIA sends out. There's like a handful of things you can use to get a sense of the industry. Yeah, I mean, payments to sites, the more money is spent on sites than has ever been spent on sites. It's difficult to tell exactly what percentage of payments to sites are covered by the Sunshine Act. It's probably in the like 80-90% ballpark, but the Sunshine Act doesn't cover payments made by drug companies that do not have a drug on the market yet.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, so that meant that Moderna only made their very first disclosure for the 2021 year. They made that in 2022, that disclosure, and never had made a disclosure prior. So every drug company, to my knowledge, except one, and it's a small one, makes their legally mandated disclosures. And so it's tough to know what percentage of site payments are coming from companies that don't have a drug on the market. But it does look like, and CREO just put out a white paper on it alongside Site Search, the Sunshine Act group, showing that about a third of payments to sites now in the for-profit side, about half goes to not-for-profits, half goes to for-profits. And the for-profit side is about a third private equity or CRO owned now, in terms of dollars paid to them. So that's been like way trending up over time. And Joel White made that post on LinkedIn about the quarterly earnings call from Steve Cutler at Icon, talking about sites. And he said 10 to 12% of all participants enrolled in studies Icon as the CRO on came from Icon wholly owned sites.
Yeah, I saw that.
The first time I've ever seen a stat along those lines, and I've asked people at AES, PPD, Thermo Fisher here about their numbers, and nobody knows. Like even higher level people internally didn't know what percentage of. They didn't think about that stat, but I like that he got engagement from like the CEO of Worldwide is commenting on the post, right? Like everyone's thinking about this same thing. If CROs have already bought a lot of the phase 1 facilities, they're almost all professionalized, really, outside of oncology at least, right? So I see that sort of happening, but I think 4 or 5 of the biggest site networks are going up for sale in the next quarter.
So this kind of goes into 2024, but it sounds like you're predicting some form of a consolidation in 2024 as we go. Consolidation of the big guys.
I think that's. I think a lot of the potential buyers right now, there's sort of 2 types of companies that buy companies. They're either, awkwardly for me, learning about this space, they're called sponsors. It's one kind. That means a financial firm, like a private equity firm.
Right.
And the second kind is called a strategic. And that means a company that already has something in the space that wants to add this as an offering or something. So CROs are the strategics of our industry here buying sites. And the perspective of the financial sponsors, so far as I've learned upon meeting a lot of them, is that they think the interest from CROs, strategics, is extremely high right now in buying site networks.
So Nelson, just gonna pick your brain a little bit here. In the age of DCT draft guidance, DCT publication, in the age of all this stuff happening for DCT and healthcare integration, do you think another potential strategic in the purchase of sites is actually going to be our hospital systems?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple looking now, but it hasn't really happened, right? I mean, so there's been a couple of hospital systems who were looking to buy site networks. I heard of one that was really looking for something with a lot of cardiology presence. But the reason I think that could be something totally new and interesting. But the CRO story is like sort of happening right now. And I don't know when the hospital thing will happen here, right?
I think it'll happen as soon as FDA publishes the official guidance. I think you're going to start seeing that jumping in. And the other thing that you might consider is we've got CROs buying up all these big site networks. We've also got grassroots site networks becoming CROs. And that's happening a lot right now. The mid to large level site networks are writing their own protocols, doing their own RFPs to sponsors. You're looking at the middle section where sponsor CROs and sites are, they're starting to blend into being the same exact kind of an organization.
Yeah, it's a little different though, because they're not giving bid defenses against the other CROs, right? They're maybe on very small trials, but the bulk of money is made in these late phase, big studies, right? So I can see that eventually happening, right? But like the founder of Quintiles is the founder of the private equity firm that bought Velocity, right? So there's certainly links here, but yeah, I think it's sort of an exciting time for the industry, and in terms of the DCT piece of it. I've learned from the bankers in the space, and bankers are sort of like the real estate brokers of the buying of businesses world. And they're looking at all the available properties and trying to connect them with people who want their first or 17th house, right? So these, they've told me that Pfizer Lyme disease vaccine story with ReifY Health, regardless of how it's turned out in that story and how real the whole thing was, has really changed interest in buying, in investing in DCT companies. It sort of killed it overnight to some degree.
It did. It did. They're very skittish. Yep.
Well, I've heard some, I've heard rumors like even Invenio is like getting rid of all of their mobile units at this point. So yeah, I was curious to know what kind of effect it would have. Regardless, again, what do I'm still curious what we actually know about that. And Nelson, aren't you an FOAI guy?
Yeah, I am.
Got anything for me? Come on.
I mean, the audit just happened like a month ago, right? So I can FOIA some things, and I can also do a Freedom of Information Act request to see who else has done a Freedom of Information Act request, right? So you can see who else knows what's going on, but the truth comes out over time, right? And either way, regardless of how real the complaints were, it really changed investor interest. They got scared, and I have heard already like this fear of, even if these were not legitimate criticisms of ReifY, like, so a big drug company can just like end a business with a press release, right? It's like a little scary. Can they just, and a lot of private equity firms have turned to like research sites and said, well, that's a safer bet. Like if Pfizer gave out a press release saying they didn't like a certain site network, it would kill it too, right? It might not kill all of running research sites, but it would be an interesting story, certainly, and affect a lot of other companies' willingness to work with that site. So I don't know. I think it's an interesting, it's the year of the, I see a lot of, DCTs sort of had this hushing effect this year, and I see the site network consolidation sort of happening at a faster pace. But I think what began this year is IQVIA bought a few sites, and that spurred other CROs to think about it, and they might swoop up a much bigger portion of them. So that's what I sort of see coming in the industry. I think it's good for the industry for the most part. There's this fear that you could just pay. Like the whole reason we have jobs is because it's drug companies aren't allowed to test their own drugs.
Right.
So we exist as this neutral third party. And they do a lot better of a job if they could do it themselves. I stand by that, right? But there's financial conflicts of interest, so they're forbidden from doing it, essentially. In practice, they're forbidden from it. So if you're just dealing with one big site to run a study that's registrational, for the FDA's approval, or one big site network, are they more easily bribable than dealing with lots of different ownership at sites? And the FDA's always had this attitude that multi-center studies are much more reliable than single center studies. It's like, what does that mean? Different doctors involved, different ownership. I mean, they've always said it means different principal investigators. But that's, I guess, something that could come up, but I don't think it's on very many people's radar. They already have jobs and enough to worry about. So I think what will come from PE firms buying all these sites, though, is startup is going to vanish. I think it'll go from, this 6+ months average to like a month or two to start.
Oh, yeah. When they start network-wide rate sheets or master CTAs, JIT kind of a startup is going to be far more prevalent.
I think that's really good for society, right? So that's the fruit. It's almost on the ground. It's so low hanging of eliminating study startup. So
I mean, Nelson, that's practically rotten fruit, man. It should have been happening a long time ago.
Yeah. So I see that as this huge benefit that these financial firms are going to provide by accident almost in this space. And then what comes after that, like unclear. But I don't see so much changing in anyone's day to day in the site side. Like I still think there'll be opportunities to work on studies, and at least when you're therapeutic area specific, there's loads of studies to pick from. But when you brought into everything, you're like at the Cheesecake Factory. Like the menu's too big. Now you also need to have the dessert, right? Like there's a lot going on. So
Brad, I have a question for you. And this is, let's look at the history of site advocacy, right? You've got like 2008, circa Dan Cifera. Then you've got the SCRS, Christine Pierre groups that are coming in. Then you've got Brad Hightower. Then I came in. Then we've got all of these other people. You've got other conferences. I'm not plugging any right now. But what do you think is going to happen in 2024 for site advocacy?
Yeah, I don't know. It's curious. I mean, I was about to ask Nelson, like, should I sell my site? I mean, is now the time? Is this the top of the market here, or over the next year? Is that going to be? I mean, I've got 3 emails in my inbox from someone from representing Centricity, right? Like, I mean, it's crazy all the outreach that's going on. I wonder how that'll change with consolidation. I don't know. I'd be curious to see how much. It may be a matter of how much consolidation takes place.
I don't know anything about macroeconomics, so I don't know if it's the best time to do it. I know that Centricity means Trinity Hunt investors, right? But I don't know much about the difference between a family office and other buyers, and so I'm pretty naive on this stuff. But I think I was told by a buddy of mine who works in private equity that the top 3 fields right now to invest in are HVAC, pharma services, which is clinical trials,
right?
Sites, and then third was med spas. And those were the top 3 areas. And when they say pharma services, they're talking about us.
Well, I'm thinking about going to HVAC at this point. So,
So Brad, I can tell you there's a lot of sites that are in that system right now. We're coming off of a 100-year pandemic that injected a global, like a world's worth of investment dollars into this industry, more money than this industry has seen since its inception. And as a result, we are at literally a historical high for the value of sites. And there's a lot of sites that are jumping on that train right now. It's kind of like the housing market. We know that it's going to deflate after this. And let's hope another pandemic doesn't happen anytime soon. But if you are in the market to sell a site to make a bunch of money, you're talking, 7, 8, 9 times EBITDA right now?
But, the reason someone wants to buy a site, why are they doing it if now's the time to sell a site?
Mm-hmm. Well, no, that's the other thing is they're picking it up before the injection of healthcare integration and before a lot of these other things.
Well, the reason everyone wants to buy sites right now is they think that in 3 to 5 years, they'll be worth more, right?
Right.
So not everybody's of the belief that you should sell right now, but it sort of depends on like your personal financial goals and how your actual site business is doing, and it's all guesswork on how the economy is going to be. Like, who knows, right? But things. But I thought it was funny that my buddy who was in the HVAC world has now moved on to this one and explains what the hierarchy was right now. So.
That's funny and interesting. I wouldn't have guessed that. My grandfather owned his own HVAC business for a long time, so it's a small world. But I don't know. I think it is an interesting time, and I've seen a lot of activity. I have no interest in really selling. Obviously, I mean, I'm kind of a joke in a way about even discussing. I'm kind of look, if things are going to if there's more opportunity, I think there's going to be more opportunity over the next 3 to 5 years. Like, I want to be a part of it, not have sold off my portion. I don't know enough about how these companies operate. Private equity hasn't exactly helped healthcare, as far as I can tell, in a positive way. Is that fair to say?
Dude, most hospitals are owned by investors.
I think that a place to see where it's had, I think, a pretty positive impact is in IVF. IVF facilities were like among the first acquired by private equity firms. They were like heavily self-pay. It didn't have to deal with insurance companies, and they benefit a lot from operationalizing things really, and really fine-tuning your operations. And so far as I've learned about them through friends and through doctor friends who've been involved in the space, it's raised the bar and like added a lot of competition to that space where academic medical centers like have trouble keeping up with the performance of these offices. And there was a lot of criticism that they'd be doing a crappier job. Well, I think there's already been like a bunch of papers now showing that there's not worse performance. What they do is they try to upsell people, and in a way that is sort of interesting. Like they say you should do genetic testing, even though you're not at heightened risk of having issues with your kids, and hospitals tend not to suggest that, right? But I don't see that as a bad thing necessarily, right? So I think that not all industries have been harmed by it, but I don't know enough examples. I don't know that much about what PE's done.
So another one I know, especially in a lot of the PE-backed, the ASOs and groups like that, referral leakage is what they call it. They try not to let referrals leak out of their organization. Don't refer out of our organization. Trying to, and there's now another generation of doctors who are like, I'm done with this. I don't want to be in the patient mills of the ASOs. I'm starting my own private practice. So now there's a spinoff of that out as a result of the machine that investors have created into healthcare.
Yeah, I mean, I think that nonprofit hospitals do that too. At least in Boston, we deal with enormous hesitation to refer outside of an academic medical center. So I hear that point, and I think that whenever you go from like having a doctor run a business to having like people with MBAs running the business, then some attitude changes occur. But I think there's a lot of good that comes from that too. And like when I want to get a surgery done, I really value going to a bigger place to do it, because I think having the bigger the place, the more procedures they conduct and the more structured their like operations are. So I see all these benefits to it, but there's some harms too, and people who haven't historically. I think the biggest risk in the clinical trial industry is right now, drug companies cannot pay more money to speed up their trial very easily. They might prioritize one drug over another because it would help people more, because it would make them more money, more likely, or whatever their reason is. But their only way of speeding up their trial really is they could pay a group like 3Wire, WCG, to staff sites, or they could do centralized advertising, or they can add more sites. But there's not really a way to just pay sites more and have them go faster. And have them fast lane your trial for twice as much money, let's say. And there's good and bad to drug companies being able to start doing that, which is what will happen when there's consolidation of ownership, because it's like economically efficient or whatever's going to come up here. It's makes sense to have a site network that costs twice as much, but goes twice as fast, right? Just like we have fancy hotels and we have less fancy hotels, and they serve different needs, right? There's room for both businesses. Maybe there's a fancy site network and a get it done cheap site network.
Like a tiered system. You can go phase 1 through 4 tiered system.
I don't disagree with that, concept, but that's pretty much against the whole idea of fair market value, though, right? I mean, that doesn't really fit.
Well, Well, so long as it's negotiated reasonably, then it means fair market value. I mean, a fair market value just means an arm's length negotiation. So if a firm says we're willing to put on twice as much staffing as a typical site would, and is it not fair market value to go to a fancy hotel versus a cheap one? I mean, it's
no. And again, I don't disagree with that in theory, but I'm saying if I have a record of being twice as good as the site next door, am I likely to get twice as high of a budget in reality? You
and I are just bad negotiators. I mean it. Like, there's not a problem with it. And in fact, if you bring on people who, one of the private equity firms hired a operator who used to be the head of site strategy at a big drug company. And he said, even if I knew a site would like recruit a boatload of people for me at very high quality, it would be like really sticking your neck out to decide to pay that site much more than others to get them on their trial. It would be legal, but it goes against the flow. And what do I gain from being this loud person at the drug company? They don't even meet each other in person, right? Everyone works remotely. Like, it's tough to stick your neck out when all people see is your neck and your head. I mean, like, there's not that much. So I think I can't really empathize with him, but I sympathized. I said, like, I guess I get it. It feels crappy though that every site ends up being like a motel instead of the Four Seasons. Maybe you should be able to pay for the Four Seasons, and there's a ranking system of all the different sites, but it's real fuzzy, so yeah.
No, I mean, I agree with that concept. Like, again, you pay more money for better service, and it's okay. There are cheap options for if you need a cheap option, and there are expensive options if you want a higher level of quality. And I don't think this, I'm not against the idea of the same thing existing, but I just haven't really seen that practically be the case.
I think it's happened to some degree, right? And I think it happens much more when a site grows bigger and bigger and bigger. But there's I got showed a contract once pretty early in my career. It must have been like 10 years ago or so. And it was a guy who worked with different bunch of sites and did their negotiation and finding studies for them. He showed me a budget. It was a study where vaccine, all like 10 sites in the study were his network's little sites. And he had negotiated like $6 million up front as the startup. And and it would have to be returned. It was like an advance negotiated up front. I was just looking at this and I was like, I have no idea what I'm doing. Like, thanks for showing me that, just so I can feel a little bad, and remember that I've never done anything like that. So
the only way that you could create a tiered quality system for sites is if you had, like, how they do biohazard level A, B, C, or 1, 2, 3 for labs.
Sure.
You'd have to do that with your protocols, because the only way that you could tier the quality of the study itself would be to tier the protocol. So let's say you have like a post-market study, right? You could have like a class D protocol. So that way sites that are classified as class D compliant can perform it. Then it would be paying less.
Well, that's one way to do it. It's not the only way. I mean, you could just say quality of site. It can also mean how quickly they enroll, right? It sort of depends on your definitions here. So they could just say, if you enroll at this pace, you get this much per person you enrolled. If you enroll at a different pace, you get less per person you enrolled.
That's like commission. You got to be careful with that.
It's not like commission, right? It's still fairly negotiated.
You're going to get paid the same. You're going to get paid different rates for the same kind of patient based off of your performance, right? The same exact patient, the same exact protocol, but you're going to get paid different. That's commission.
So the reason you're getting paid more is because there's more overhead involved in going quickly.
No, that makes total sense. That makes total sense. I'm thinking compliance from a compliance anti-kickback stark level.
The only rule on compliance is that if you are a site that has any component of it dealing with federal payers like Medicare, Medicaid, others, then you must have an arm's length negotiation with the drug company involved. And it can't be that the purpose of your doing this, of their paying you, is actually to bribe you to prescribe their drugs. Okay? That's the only law, right? And that's been interpreted to mean a bunch of different things. But drug companies could make a judgment like, yeah, we looked for bids. This place was offering this amount. So long as they're really negotiating at arm's length, then they're okay, right? I mean, I hear all the worry about this. I've never actually heard of an example of a drug company that was even accused of a violation of Stark or federal anti-kickback statute when they were actually even arguably just trying to run a research study and not trying to bribe.
I asked this question publicly. I was like, someone give me a single example of that ever happening. No one could produce one.
Yeah, and these are public things, right? Yeah. They're very findable. There's loads of corporate integrity agreements, examples of drug companies bribing doctors through research in order to prescribe their drugs. But they're very transparently not about recruiting participants.
Right.
Very clearly. They're not linked ever to how many participants a site gets or how fast they get them. They're like speaking fees and doing an investigator-initiated trial that they didn't even really care about. And only they found out there's a whistleblower showing this was only created to pay a doctor who was a big prescriber for them. Things like that. So I just don't think it's as big a... I think that if drug companies genuinely saw a way to pay someone to go faster, they don't see it right now. But if they truly saw a way to do it, they'd figure out the legal components of it, which aren't, I don't think that tough to figure out. And I think it might be good for society if the important drugs could get tested faster.
So don't forget the payer of last resort model as well. That says Medicare must be the lowest paying provider in a system. So that is a law on the books, and that combined with the FDA's law that says that PIs must have the bandwidth and capacity to perform a trial according to quality standards, says that if you underpay a trial, then that's also against the law.
Sure. I mean, I think it's sort of a separate topic, right? But when initially forming my company, all my doctors were W-2 employees, full-time people, and I forbid them from treating patients. I had this theory that by having these doctors not treat any patients, not prescribe any branded medications. I knew a little bit about off-label promotion and bribery. We could just be not bound by any rules on fair market value. You're allowed to bribe a hotel to stay there, right?
It's true.
Why couldn't, so long as the bribery wasn't intended to lead to the prescribing of drugs covered by federal payers?
That's actually really interesting. And I wonder, are there ways for sites to structure to sort of?
No, there's not. I did it, and drug companies just ended up not caring. The thing holding back paying us more was never those laws.
Fair.
So I ended up figuring out different ways to get paid more per person over time, but but that was like an idea I had, and it just has never really meant much to companies.
I mean, it makes sense though. I like the strategy. I like the trying it out at least. I mean, it makes some sense to me. I'd like to have you back, Nelson, at some point and talk more about your site. I think you do some interesting things that are kind of interesting and compelling to me. I'd like to maybe have you come on, just pick your brain about how you operate. I know you do sort of a maybe different model than some, instead of going wide and broad, staying very focused, which is working. Sounds like extremely well for you.
Yeah, happy to talk more. Whenever it's pretty. I wish more people talked about the money in this space and how it really works. It took me many years to understand how patient recruitment firms operated and how much money they actually got on the trials I was working on. And I wish someone had explained it earlier. So I've probably seen hundreds of Dan Svera podcasts and shows and all yours, you guys. But I think that there's a lot untapped still in just talking more about money and that people should be open about. I think it's embarrasses people too much to talk about money.
No, I think that's a great idea. I'd throw out the idea of I've considered just like sharing my financials, like I'm a public company, just for not for any other reason than for like people to maybe be able to learn from it. Because look, I'm far from a business genius. I'm probably doing a lot of things wrong, but I think it could still be insightful for big parts of the industry. I would love if we had more examples, because we really don't, right? I mean, what's the closest thing to like a public site? It would be like Science 37, I guess, that we have like some public financials on.
2007, Synexus was publicly traded in the UK.
Oh, was it? Okay, interesting.
But then they went private, and that's the last one. We do have a couple of sites that went bankrupt. Site Networks, Kinderhook, private equity firm bought them. So there's some public info on them, but there's extremely little out there.
Right.
So yeah, I think it would be great for sites to do this and talk more openly about it. And I think a lot of fears in the space, no offense to my fellow lawyers, are sort of to drive business here. And you can still follow the law and talk about money. A lot of other industries talk about money. So yeah.
That's true. No, I like it. That's I think that's maybe a good note as we put together content over the next year and really drill down, because again, I mean, I don't know about you, probably both of you take calls from sites who are starting out or even beyond starting out, but are struggling with money. Something to talk about.
The number one story, Brad. I really wanted to help patients. A doctor and I decided to start a site. We've been at it for 2 years. By the way, what's a remittance? That's a thing.
I mean, it's a weird world, and because you can be both. Like, it can be incredibly lucrative to run a site. There's no secret about that, but it can also absolutely break you. And there's everything in between. So, and we see it. I mean, we see incredibly successful sites of all sizes, and we see people fail miserably, big and small. So it's not one way. I think there's a lot.
Nice note to end on right there. Right? No, that's great. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thanks for jumping on, dude. Craig's feeling well, and have him on some other time. So it's nice to have you jump in. And again, I've been wanting to have you on to pick your brain about your site, and especially like your marketing and advertising strategies. I know we've talked about it a little bit offline. I think maybe that could be very instructive, because I think you're doing something smarter than a lot of us. We could learn from you. So love to have you back. Next week, I've actually got Dr. Stillman. I don't know if you guys read her posts about her husband who's terminally ill, and them trying to identify clinical trial opportunities.
Excellent. That'll be a good one.
Yeah, I'm really stoked. I had been reaching out to her for a while. We had kind of couldn't get it set on a date. So I'm really excited to have her on, because it's kind of funny to hear a physician who's, not in the space, but obviously a physician, struggle so much with just identifying a clinical trial and all the experiences with sites. It's
the craziest. ACRP had a keynote a few years ago, and it's Peter DiBiaso. and I forget his wife's name, but he was like in leadership at IQVIA. His wife's like in leadership, genuine leadership at Sanofi, and he got Parkinson's disease, and he couldn't, like, was hunting to figure out a trial to get into and how hard it was. And these were like as in the industry as one can be.
Yeah, right. It's insane. It's insane. Yeah. So a long ways to go. We've got a long ways to go. And I'm sorry I didn't get a lot of the questions. Also, my stream is being super weird because I feel like on LinkedIn there's way more questions than what have popped up on StreamYard. So I don't know if there's some kind of issue, but
maybe it's because I logged in first. Maybe it's going off of the SOS ones.
I don't see any.
Technology hates me. So
all right, I'll tell you, I'm gonna have to go, Brad. I have a noon, but well,
thanks, guys. We'll be back next week. Thanks, Nelson. Thanks, Dr. Fox. Everybody, have a great rest of your week.